But to start things off, this player to me has been the most fun for me personally. A little bit of bias here since he's a Heat player, but it's been so much fun to watch him develop over the course of the season and reinvent himself. Duncan Robinson is going to be the subject of our conversation to start things off. Man, has he really taken a jump? Last season was really tough for him. Max Strus took a lot of his minutes. Duncan was playing spot minutes. He wasn't starting. He didn't have a big role in the offense. He was really relegated to just being a spot guy. Come off the screens, be a JJ Redick, be a Ray Allen, be a Klay Thompson, catch and shoot. That was his primary role. His time on the ball was very low. I went back last season and looked at how much time he was spending on the ball. The majority of his possessions last season were possessions to where he had the ball for less than 2 seconds. So that tells me that, number one, he had a lot of possessions to where he would catch the ball and get a layup off of a back screen or something like that, or in transition. And then number two, it was a lot of shots that were coming off of screens, curling off of down screens. So he was catching and shooting traditional Duncan Robinson, stuff we've seen for a long time. So last season, 77% of his shots were with less than 2 seconds of touch time. And these are numbers from NBA.com/stats. This season, that has been reduced by almost 11%. So now it's down to 66% of his possessions have a touch time of under 2 seconds. Now 30% of his possessions now feature him having the ball between 2 and 6 seconds on the basketball court. So that tells us that when he has the ball in his hands, he's dribbling more, he's creating more for himself and his teammates, and he's not just coming off of a look created by somebody else to where he immediately goes up for a shot in the paint or outside. And there are a few different big highlights of his game that I wanted to cover. So the touch time is to kind of get things rolling. And then the dribble drive game is something I wanted to highlight here real quick, just as far as like how much he's getting to the rim. Last season, 7% of his shots were at the rim. This season, it's all the way up to 18% of his shots are coming at the rim. And last season, yeah, I understand last season was down for him, so it wasn't the norm necessarily. But I went back and I looked at past seasons. He was never higher than 12%. That was his rookie season. And obviously, he was playing a lot less minutes, and his role was very small then as well. But 12% was the previous high. Now it's at 18%. And he is still maintaining good efficiency there. He's shooting about 70%. And what's interesting is if you go back to last season and you look at his efficiency, he was at 79%. So it's like, oh, well, he's finishing less often at the rim. But you got to remember the volume is way higher. And the types of shots he's getting at the rim are different. So last season, it was like, hey, a lot of these are uncontested because a lot of his plays were off of cuts in transition. So he was getting these cuts and they were just wide open layups. So that's why his rim percentage was so high. This season, a lot of these are coming off of his own looks that are coming off of dribbling off of a closeout situation. So he's the one creating his own looks at the rim. So still being at about 70% for his volume, I think is very strong. Looking at the usage, I mean, he's just taking more shots. He's using more of the offense. So now he's at about 18% usage. And his previous high a few years ago was about 16%. So even looking back to his most used season, he had the ball in his hands the most. He's still higher than that. And his efficiency marks are all still really good. One last point here before I give you the mic, Avi. It's going to be how much he's running these sets as the pick and roll ball handler. Going back last season, he was at about 0.74 points per possession as the pick and roll ball handler. This season, he is at about 0.88 points per possession as the ball handler. And the frequency, it's a similar jump to his rim percentage. So now he's at about 17% of those possessions. He's the pick and roll ball handler. Last season, 6.9. So we can see like how much more he's using these possessions for the Heat, running offense, getting guys involved, and he's doing really good in that role. Rim percentage is good. 3-point percentage is really solid. It's back up to about 40%, which is where you want to see Duncan Robinson in a normal season. So those are just a few things that I noticed off the top. I have a few more, but wanted to give you a chance, Avi, to also kind of throw in what you've seen so far. What stood out to you as far as what he's displayed on film.
I think he shows the power of what a slight improvement in your handle can do for the rest of your game.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest. I'll let the listeners in on this. When we were first making the list and trying to choose who to pick for most improved players, you suggested Duncan Robinson, and I sat there thinking, Duncan Robinson. I mean, I know his handle looks better. He had a highlight recently. I like the way he's been passing the ball to Bam, but Duncan Robinson, really? I was scrolling out a list myself. He wasn't in the top 10, but my God, I mean, that was a great call by you. To me, it felt like someone just gave me a box of chocolates just for showing up. I was like such a nice experience, such a nice bonus. I didn't expect it at all. Pleasant surprise. Watching Duncan Robinson this season, I feel like there's certain environmental factors that I think we probably need to consider when we discuss his growth. First one we probably need to consider is the fact that with Max Strus gone, there were some more reps available for him in starting lineups or in lineups with Bam anyways. Secondly, Tyler Hero has played about half as many minutes as he did last season, so we have to factor that in too. He got more opportunities to be in the starting lineup, and his best synergy and chemistry is with Bam. So pairing those two together typically unlock the best of his game. And then we get to the dribble. This season, on his touches, he has averaged 1.3 dribbles per touch. Last season, he was at 0.82. Now, that figure is sometimes skewed by opportunity. And yes, he is getting more touches this time, but that goes into what you're saying. They're giving him more of those pick and roll ball handler reps because they trust him and because they need him. It's a bit of both. They need him because there were times when they didn't have enough secondary playmakers, so somebody needs to carry the load. Duncan, just go try it. But he's been so successful on them that they've continued giving him those opportunities. He's been getting to the rim more, but some of that is a facet of the fact that his chemistry with Bam is so good. When they start playing more of these actions as they did in the past, where Duncan and Bam are playing off of each other with those handoffs, where when his dribble gets stalled out, he passes it right back to Bam. Bam can find him on a back cut. He'll screen for other players, release, and be wide open under the hoop, and Bam will find him. That synergy still exists, but now it's complemented by the fact that Duncan is much more capable of putting the ball on the floor himself. And so what we're getting is a much more complete Duncan Robinson. His assist percentage is up over past seasons as well, partially because of that. I don't personally feel like he's that incisive of a passer. I've seen other players this season who we've discussed where I feel like they're much more incisive with how they're passing the ball. But he's not bad at it either. There are definitely some guards right now who get far more pick and roll opportunities who I feel like are less incisive than he is on his limited touches, mostly because he is so good at finding the cutters and knowing the sets. It feels like when he's the one running a pick and roll ball handler, he knows what the screener is supposed to do. He knows what he knows what the back screener is supposed to do because he's occupied those roles. So he knows, all right, this is the moment when the guy's going to come open. All I have to do is make a simple read. He's playing with that IQ. And then defensively, we had this discussion off air for a second. I think he is one of the 5 players who has benefited the most from this recent rule change. So people can go look it up, but around somewhere in February, the NBA refs on Twitter posted something about their rules of emphasis. And correspondingly around that time, that's when we started to see the shift in how refs were calling games. Because over the last 3 years, after the pace and space revolution, we've had the driving revolution. More and more players on the court are people who are capable of driving and attacking closeouts or playing off of one another the way we're describing Duncan and Bam, where, okay, my dribble is finished, but that's okay. I can just pass it to a teammate who'll pass it back to me and I can restart my dribble. So with more and more of those players, the NBA had kind of reached a crisis moment where there were too many fouls perhaps being called on defenders who were in legal guarding position or in a position where they should not be penalized for having reached a certain spot on the floor before the offensive player, but the offensive player had the flexibility to kind of be able to drive into them and exaggerate the contact and get fouls off of it. And perhaps no player was hurt more by that than Duncan Robinson. He is tall, he is lanky, and he's not that strong in the core or just his body in general. I mean, he was a late bloomer. He's just not that kind of. He doesn't have that kind of strength profile.
Right.
In the last few seasons, especially when he had to share minutes with Hero and Strus, they would have him guarding. They would have him guarding up. There were times when he was a power forward in some lineups, which feels a little bit like malpractice in the modern league. So the fact that now he's getting to play more of his minutes at shooting guard and small forward the way he has in the past, and the fact that now when he stands in there and defensively, he's typically pretty aware positionally. He can stand in there, drivers can try to run into him, and they're not going to get called as much. So just off the basis of that, he's a better defender than he was before, just because of how the league is officiating it. It's made him a little bit more valuable, and it's made him. I think it's helped Spoelstra trust him more in terms of placing him in the starting lineup and giving him more minutes than he otherwise would have. So I feel
Yeah.
like this is just a player whose confidence is rising in all facets, and I feel like you can almost see that in his 3-point numbers too.
No, for sure. It kind of all ties together. When
Yeah,
you're playing more, you're in a role where you're comfortable. You have more opportunities. He's had the freedom to explore more of his game than in years past. And I think he deserves a lot of credit because I think it's difficult to go from a role to where you're primarily a spot up player, you're a 3-point specialist, like that's your primary role, and then your game opens up to the point to where you're a legitimate secondary ball creator, ball handler, to where you're running these sets. We both threw out some numbers about the pick and roll ball handler, and if you can take on more of those opportunities, and like yes, you're correct in that those were more available because Strus is now out of the picture, and there have been other injuries, so it kind of further increases the dependence on players like Butler and Robinson, these other guards that are left over. But to increase your frequency on sets like that, the pick and roll ball handler, and to have good efficiency as well, I think those could go in hand. If you have more possessions and you're scoring more points per possession, that really demonstrates an increase in your effectiveness and your ability to kind of run the offense. And it's really not something we've seen from him before, really at this degree. Even when Strus was less of a factor in the rotation and things were, he had more of a role. He still wasn't running the offense as much as he is now.
yeah,
And you touched on the assist a little bit earlier. For sure, he definitely has a higher assist percentage. Last season, he was at just under 10%, which was 47th percentile for somebody in his position. This season, it's risen to about 15%, which puts him 80th percentile, a good amount above average for somebody in that position. So 3 assists per game doesn't seem like a lot, but he was at about 1 last season. So he's definitely getting teammates more involved. He's taking advantage of those reps as the ball handler. And I like to look at assist to usage ratio as well, because I think assist percentage and just the amount of assists you have needs to be put in context.
yeah. You're right.
Because if you have a certain number of assists and your usage is here, for somebody it may seem really solid. But for another player to where their usage is double, but your assists are still at this level, it's a lot less impressive. So for Duncan, his ratio is at about 0.86 for assist to usage, and that's 71st percentile via cleaning the glass. So that tells us, with his amount of usage, he still has a fair amount of assist and just the opportunities to get assist. So I think all in all, I really want to give Duncan a lot of credit. That's what I'm trying to kind of convey with all the numbers, and some of your insights about his film also reinforce that, his improved handle, and he's just a really smart player. If
Yeah,
we're able to kind of adjust, that's one of the makings of great players, is the ability to kind of adjust on the fly when your role changes from not even season to season, but from game to game. Like
yes,
there's so many different lineups that he'd have had to run out here. They're always down 2 or 3 players, if not more. He has the ball more some games than less, but it seems like he's never rattled by that change in his role. So it, everything put together, the passing, the percentage at the rim, the frequency at the rim, his 3-point percentage is back 40% on 7 attempts per game. He was only at about 4.6 attempts per game last season. He shot 32%. That's terrible for a player like Duncan Robinson. And he's taking less of his shots from there. So we've always known him to be this 3-point guy that's taking all these threes.
yeah,
I mean, he was shooting 81% of his shots from 3 last season. This season, it's only 67. So he's redistributing his shots, going from 3 to the rim and the paint a lot more. So all in all, great season by Duncan. For me, a little bit of bias here. He's top 3 in my most improved. Just looking at all the different areas he's improved, and the league is going to give it, of course, to guys where
Yeah.
their scoring average goes up the most. But if we really dive in deep, and you've seen it, the film, the numbers, everything like that, he's taking on a completely different role, and he's very effective in that role. So that's why I think he ranks pretty high for me.
I can't even disagree, honestly, because we'll get to some of the other players later. But a lot of those players, some of it is a new role has been presented to them, and they stepped in wonderfully and occupied it. But
Yes.
it's difficult to parse whether that's an improvement or them just getting a new opportunity to showcase skills that they might already have. Those are
Right.
latent abilities that they had before, but they just weren't unlocked because of other players on their team. Especially if you're playing on a team with multiple stars, sometimes that happens. So with Duncan, it's legitimately, again, you were talking about the assist to usage ratio. That's even more valuable when you consider that his role is not substantially different from what it was before. Sometimes you'll see players where, okay, they're shifting from being more of a combo guard to a guard, and naturally their assists to usage rate is obviously going to go up just because as a point guard, you're running so many more of the sets, even if as a passer, you're not significantly better. But with Duncan, in virtually a very similar role, he's improved his game in almost every facet. So, I mean, that sounds like a most improved candidate to me. So I can't argue with it. It's
Yeah.
I'd have to really think about it, but top three, sure, why not?